David and I were out in Israel and Palestine along with Anya Lewandowska from my team just in June last year, and we've got a wee bit of reportage about what we saw there and just how desperate things are right now. So David will give us some of his thoughts on the matter. I'll give you a wee bit from me, but as with a Fringe meeting, any Fringe meeting, it's all about questions and comments and discussion. But I'll open with a question, and I want an answer to the question by the end of the meeting. It's how do we, as a party and a government and a movement, change how we interact with the peoples of Israel and Palestine? Because it's bad now and it's getting worse. And we must prevail upon the international community to do everything we can and be that voice for good in the world, which Scotland could and should be.
Hear, hear.
So with that,
Sorry.
slight pitch invasion there, but not to worry.
It's a bit early to be throwing things.
Exactly. I've seen worse CA meetings, don't I? David, you're very welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, it's grand to be here. The last time I was in Aberdeen, I think it was a toddler. If I should be told, I was brought in a cardboard box actually because I had an aversion to sand. I used to be taken to the beach, and apparently I went into hysterics whenever sand got between my toes. So my parents always associate Aberdeen with me sitting in a cardboard box on the beach. So, but that aside, I thought I'd get that confession off my chest early door.
That's where I woke up this morning.
Interesting, I've got such an affinity with the Middle East now, given that aversion. But anyway, the last week or so we've heard much talk yet again about another intifada, a third intifada. And, I must mention immediately that in our presence here is Yehuda Shaw, who is one of the co-founders of Breaking the Silence, which is an organisation you may have heard of, which is a group of veteran Israeli soldiers who have come together and collected testimonies to break the silence. And one of the remarks that I want to open on is something that Yehuda said to me the other day, which was that actually, we could be sitting here years from now talking about a 20th intifada or a 25th intifada, but it doesn't really matter that much. What matters is the occupation and the continuation of the occupation. That is the core issue here, not whether there's another intifada looming or whatever. I mean, I think in order to talk about the future, I'd like to just quickly reference the past, and by that I don't mean some grand going back in time as many people do when they discuss this issue. I just want to reference some of the things that I've learned over the last sort of 20 or more years, going back to 1987, it's the first intifada. Some of the things that I've learned about this particular issue. One of the things I have learned is that nothing's neutral. You can't open your mouth on this subject without someone having an opinion on it and telling you their opinion on it. So, impartiality is a very difficult thing to have, despite what Alan was saying there when it comes to this issue. It tends to invoke very passionate responses. That's one thing I've learned. Another thing I've also learned is that, with the Israelis that I know, and certainly with the Israeli authorities, there's a pretty uncompromising group of people there. They're not easy to deal with. So that was lesson number 2. In conjunction with that, I've learned also about the scale of Palestinian resilience and incredible patience over the years. It's remarkable that we don't see, frankly, even more violence than there is at the moment. I've also learned that there's a phenomenal power of the Zionist lobby. And I'm sure anyone who's been active in this particular campaign or role has been on the receiving end of that. Goodness knows I have, in letters, emails, you name it, being harassed at meetings, even rather threatening and vitriolic remarks being made to members of my family because of my association with this. And that's not uncommon. So the power of the lobby is quite profound, as I'm sure you know. And another thing I've learned is the utter and complete failure, by and large, of the European and international community to do something about this situation. To use an Arab expression, they've been sitting on their hands for far too long now, and it's time to step up to the plate and address the problems that we have. So these are some of the things that I've learned. Some of the things I've learned about my recent visit when I accompanied Alan on that visit was the reinforcement of an existing apartheid regime. Now, that lobby will tell me there's no such thing as apartheid in Israel. There is. There's no question about it. The entire structure does exist. And when I was over in the recent visit, I hadn't been there for some time, I was amazed at the extent to which that structure was being reinforced daily and at every level, both in the material sense, roads, barriers, blockades, and in the psychological sense also in terms of the shutting down of Palestinian aspirations. I've also learned recently, and again referencing some of the remarks that Yehuda made the other day, about the degree of collusion between the state, the military, and the settler movement itself. Very, very tight community there. And also I learned of an absence of real Palestinian leadership. That's one of the main issues at the moment. There is no genuine leading individual holding the reins here. And that remark was made to us by a number of Palestinians when we were over on the last visit. And I think that's why we've got this rather rudderless, strange unrest going on at the moment that doesn't seem to be have any reference to the previous intifadas, where you had committees and you had a united leadership, you had communiques, you had a structure there. That doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. One of the things I also learned was the number of progressive Israeli voices that there are. I think too often people within the movement and within the campaign for Palestinian rights and justice fail to acknowledge the role that Israelis play in this particular campaign. Like Yehuda, like many people that we met during a recent visit, there are Israelis there that are as concerned about the situation with regards to the Palestinians as any of us here are. There's no question about that, and I think we have to engage with those progressive voices within the Israeli community themselves. And of course, we need more international action. Another thing I learned, listening by and large, not just to Palestinians, but to Israelis during that visit. We heard time and again from former diplomats, Israeli diplomats, concerned leading politicians and activists within the Israeli community of their desire for greater engagement on the issues at the moment from the international community. The title of this talk, of course, is The Future and the options that we've got. We can talk about one-state, two-state solutions. We've done all that before. I really don't want to dwell on that. Perhaps there are other platforms in which we can engage in that, but I'm happy to hear the comments from people themselves. One of the things that troubles me is that, if we don't come up with alternatives, though, there is a drift towards a kind of extremism. I think both, obviously, in terms of the political complexion within Israel itself at the moment, and as we heard from Palestinians when we were over recently, there is a growing vacuum because of this leadership vacuum and a disenfranchised youth that are beginning to look in a direction, I think, that would be catastrophic for the Palestinian cause. And we all know who we're talking about here, the Daeshis of the world, the Islamic states of the world, and the kind of influence of those groups. I mean, it was interesting that one of the Palestinian veteran activists that we spoke to when we were there, had told me about a vote recently at Berzit University, which is always used as a kind of barometer of student and youth opinion. And he said that vast majority of people who had voted were voting for parties and groups and allegiances that were leaning towards the extremist end of the political scale. That in itself is very much a cause for concern. Options, we can talk about boycotts, disinvestment and whatever. These are other things, other tools at our disposal. And again, Israelis that we spoke to were actually actively engaging with this and encouraging us to push, in some instances, for a greater degree of boycott and disinvestment. I know the jury's out in that. Some people believe in it, some don't. But that was something that we heard a lot of. And I think, and I'll leave Alan to talk about the last point here, and that is what both from his party's point of view, from a Scottish perspective, that we can do. I find it very frustrating as someone who's dealt with foreign affairs for the best part of 3 decades now as a journalist here, that I'm constantly looking through a UK or Westminster telescope whenever I have to deal with foreign affairs issues. We often have a different take here, We often have a different opinion. And the sooner we have the opportunity to actually express that opinion here in Scotland, if it's at odds with what UK government and Westminster position is, then so be it. So I'm hoping in the future that we will have the opportunity for that. As I said at the beginning of this, what this boils down to, above all else, is the occupation. Yehuda would make this point. The Israelis we spoke to, the Palestinians we listened to, it comes back to the occupation. The occupation has to stop if any progress is going to be made. And that is where the pressure needs to be applied right now by whatever means at our disposal. When I wrote this book on the Intifada, or the Intifadas, some years ago, I remember being in Lebanon, and I met an exiled Palestinian there in a refugee camp. And I was just finishing the book at the time, and events were moving in Lebanon, and I said to him, I'm never going to get this book finished, because, every time I draw it to a conclusion, something rears its head, like the situation we're seeing in the West Bank and Jerusalem over the last few days. How am I going to get it finished? I said to him. He said, you know, there's never going to be an end to your book until there's an end to the occupation and Palestinians have a home of their own. And that is the position that we find ourselves in today. We need desperately to ratchet up pressure at every available opportunity. And I'm encouraged by the fact that there's so many people here and willing to take up that particular challenge. Thank you.
Well, David, thanks very much. Before we go on to questions, comments, discussion, I likewise am delighted to see so many people here. I see Corey from our Westminster group, we've got our Holyrood group represented, we've got councils up and down the country, we've got the European Parliament as well, to the extent that the EU's made much of a difference to this entire discussion. When I say that we're bound to the people of Palestine and Israel, we really are. The roots of empire is actually where much of the fault lines that are now exploding were set down. Balfour was Scottish. Balfour, as in the Balfour Declaration, was Scottish. We are bound to the people of the region. And one thing that blew me away, the combined area of Israel and Palestine, West Bank and Gaza, is smaller than Strathclyde Regional Council was. Yeah. And yet we're used to seeing the map on such a big scale because it's so significant. But we're actually talking about an incredibly small patch of the world. But the geopolitical significance is way beyond that magnitude. And the injustice that has been done to the Palestinian people goes back a number of years, and we have a responsibility in that. And I think if we're talking about things like apologies for slavery and apologies for the opium trade, well, I think we need to have a wee bit transparency and accountability about UK foreign policy over the years as well. The idea that this isn't our problem is delusional. The idea that we can walk away from this is an irresponsible position for us to take. We're bound to the people of the region. And I have to say, I am depressed as hell about where things are right now. I think we've seen over the last 24 hours, and I think we'll see over the next 48 hours, the de facto annexation of East Jerusalem. Yeah. I think the security pretext has been used, and we saw this when we were there. It has been used as in order to have security, we must crack down and we must annex, and it's a form of collective punishment. And there will be some lumps and bumps as they roll it out, but we're seeing the de facto annexation of East Jerusalem. Now that makes a two-state solution absolutely impossible. And I've got a piece in the Sunday Herald tomorrow where it's, let's not kid ourselves, there is no Middle East peace process. The two-state solution is not on the table. There is no table. There are no talks. When we were there, we met with the Palestinian foreign minister in his great big spanky office in Ramallah, and there was thousands of people hanging around and not doing a huge amount. And I was struck, as I always am when I'm meeting the Palestinian politicians, that you can't actually control or speak for nothing on the street. You're a succession of ineffectual Uncle Toms who have been absolutely neutered in the eyes of your own people and in the eyes of your interlocutors. So the extent to which the Palestinian Authority is able to actually control what's going on right now is, I think, one of the big elephants in the room. That I don't think they're in a position to stop anything happening. And this is where, as David says, the emergence of other actors, be it ISIS, be it Daesh, be it Al-Qaeda, or whatever they're called this week, actually doesn't greatly matter. We are seeing a preponderance towards radicalisation, which is born out of the frustration of the Palestinian people on a daily basis. And I was staggered at the extent to which we are seeing settlement activity as a state actor. And it's not entirely with the direction of the Israeli state, but it's entirely within their control. Now, I've got Israeli friends in Tel Aviv, and they talk about the settlers as, we are terrified about what these guys are dragging us into. Israeli society is incredibly complex. There's aspects of religion, aspects of culture, aspects of history. Israel remains a very, very new country with a huge immigration rate, particularly as they call them Russian Jews, Russian as well as Latvian and Polish or wherever else. And many of the settlers that we're talking about, some are religiously motivated, yeah, absolutely. Many are economically motivated, because it's a good house to have and it's a safe place to be, because the state of Israel, once it's established, is required to protect it. And let's let's remember where we are in this. We are in favour as a party of a two-state solution. Israel has an absolute right to exist. Israel has an absolute right to security within its own borders. Israel does not have a right to annex Palestinian land and then adopt the language of victimhood when there is a reaction. So from our part, we have principled neutrality within this discussion. We, as Scotland, we believe in international law, we believe in multilateralism. Where we've seen human rights abuses on either side, and goodness me, there's enough human rights abuses going on in Gaza and the West Bank as well. But where there are human rights abuses going on, this is not an esoteric matter. This is a daily frustration for the people of Palestine and a daily threat to the people of Israel. And the idea that you can live behind a security wall and forget about what's on the other side only goes so far. So I think we're at the start of a conflagration. I think we're seeing a willfully created scenario. We were in Israel-Palestine just after the election of the present government, which is still presided over by Prime Minister Netanyahu, but considerably more right-wing in its makeup, considerably more extreme in its makeup, and that's saying something. And we are seeing daily policies being rolled out, which is making life for the Palestinian people more difficult and more frustrating. So there is a reaction to that. And the concern is that everybody is losing control of what's going on in the situation right now. It's Al-Shabaab, the street, which is going to do the reacting. So in terms of where we are, obviously we favour international law. I have pressed the EU authorities to be much more vocal, much more active, because where individual member states have patently not taken up the reins of international leadership. The US is in a presidential election at the moment, so nobody from the US is going to be doing anything anytime soon that's brave in the Middle East. So the EU has cleaner hands than most on this. But as an example of just how willfully useless the European Union is in this matter. And remember, the EU is a collective of states. If the states are not united, the EU can't actually do that much. But as an indication of just where we are, and I sent a letter to Ms Mogherini, our High Representative, just this week, Arab Israelis formed the third biggest bloc within the Knesset. There was a united Arab Israeli list at the last election, and the third biggest bloc. The EU mission has not met with that bloc in the Knesset. Now we've got an EU mission of around 30 people. We met with them all. Charming, charming people who I don't doubt are having a super time. But not actually making a difference, not actually doing that much. And I think we've seen a dereliction of duty of the international community to the Israeli and Palestinian people, because we're seeing the systematic brutalisation of two sets of people here. And I think it's ending badly. And I'm very depressed about it, so if anybody's got any ideas for me to take up in Brussels, or for Corey at Westminster, or for Sandra at Holyrood, we're all ears, we truly are. We've seen the creation of SNP Friends of Palestine. Remember, our position is principled neutrality within this discussion. We are not biased on any side. I want to see a peaceful future for all the peoples of the region. The Israelis have a right to live in peace, so do the Palestinians. We are not biased in this discussion, much as it's tough. So from our position, I want as many ideas as we can that we can take forward as a movement and as a government, as many ideas I can take forward into the European Parliament, but look forward to your questions and your comments. There you go.
Yes, it is.